So have you guys looked at Goodreads this year yet? Hi, my name is Courtney, and today I'm going to be discussing the Goodreads achievements and hopefully trying to complete them. If you don't know, Goodreads is a reading website that is connected to Amazon. A lot of people have been trying to find alternatives, but there's a lot of flopping with reading websites going on. I know that there are some good sites that people really enjoy, like Fable and Storygraph. The thing that really draws people into Goodreads is the review aspect. Fable and Storygraph, I believe, are more for tracking your own reading, and they are much smaller platforms in terms of visibility, and they're not as review focused, I believe. And the other big thing is that both of them use AI. Fable noticeably just had a big flop with their AI, and people have been really going to Storygraph and questioning their AI use. Some people are really on the fence about that one because it is an in-house AI, but as someone who is very much anti all AI and does not see a point in it unless you're using it for STEM purposes, I have not been persuaded quite yet to go to Storygraph, especially because Storygraph, again, is not a big review site. So really it's weird because Goodreads has never really updated their website. It's completely old. And the biggest thing is that because it's completely old and nobody updates it or cares about it, it doesn't implement AI as far as we know. They probably do in some respect, we just don't know what it is yet. But I don't trust Bezos, so it's probably there, but we don't know about it yet. But I also haven't found the site to transition to either, so I don't know. Eventually I'll probably just keep continuing to track my own reading using sites like this to do reviews, and maybe just stopping Goodreads or any kind of social account for reading tracking altogether. But we are here to talk about the reading challenges this year because for the first time, Goodreads is doing something on their website. Weird. So over the past couple months, I would say maybe 6 months, Goodreads has been updating their website, giving it a fresher, cleaner look. Some of these things I like about the site, some of them I haven't enjoyed about the site. Sometimes it's harder to get to certain things on the page, but I appreciate a little bit of a new look for them. And in this year, they are implementing these reading challenges, or like these achievements. I think that's what they're called, achievements. It's really cute. You get like a little bookmark when you complete one. And I, being a completionist, kind of competitive, I'm like, oh, I have to collect them all. I have to win at this. And my friend at work pointed out to me, oh, this is actually from Kindle. So she's a big Kindle reader and she, uses the unlimited Kindle stuff. So that's how she knew that all of these achievement stuff, they're not new. They're being brought over from Kindle, which that is starting to make sense. We'll get into it, the relationship between Kindle and these achievements, but I think it's very noteworthy that they are trying to basically transition us into going to Amazon, buying Kindle Unlimited, buying a Kindle, buying books on their site. They're trying to connect the achievements to some type of monetary process, which that makes a lot of sense now. Because why else would they be giving us something fancy and nice? It's to make money off of us. So there are a couple different achievements. It is attached to the reading challenge that we do every year, where you basically set up a reading goal for yourself. Now there's like specific achievements. There's 12 that are just related to the months of readings. So basically you read a book once a month, you've earned yourself an achievement. And then there's a couple relating to your reading goal. So you read the amount of books on your challenge, you get a couple achievements. And the final achievement, the ones that really push me to discuss this in a video, those are the community reading achievements. This is what I was talking about to my coworker. These are the achievements that are being taken from Kindle and implemented onto Goodreads. Basically, these different challenges are released a couple times throughout the year. And so as of now, there have been 5 released challenges, and each one is a different theme. So far we have Buzzy Books, which is related to the top books of 2024. We have Epic Quest, which is fantasy books. We have Era Explorer, which is related to historical fiction. We have the Essential Reader Challenge, which is related to Black authors for Black History Month. And then the final challenge, the one that really was like, I need to make a video about this, is the Sweet and Spicy Challenge, which is related to romance. So besides the Essential Reader Challenge, which is the Black History Month challenge, all of the challenges are curated by, they're saying they're curated by reader statistics. So they're either the books that were most read last year or the last couple years, the books that were the most popular, whatever statistic they set out for that specific challenge. And that's what gets me, because making a very specific curated list for the Black History Month challenge makes sense. Obviously, you want a little bit of curation, you want a little bit of oversight on that to do a good job of it. I can't speak to if they succeeded in that, but that's obviously what they were trying to accomplish with that. But for every other challenge, they're saying the statistics were implemented versus someone curating the list. but there is curation, and we'll get into where that is. But the thing for me that is driving me crazy with these challenges, and I'm hoping someone else will feel the same way as me about this, is that each challenge is different. Like how they track them, how they use stats, they're all different. So for the Buzzy books, it makes sense they're using the stats from 2024. Basically for each genre, they have the top 12 read books of 2024. That's fine. Perfect, nice, no notes. Getting into Epic Quest, they use the most read and most want to read lists of Goodreads readers, and it's all books that were published for the last 3 years, and it's all books that have an average rating over 3.5. They decided to cut young adult books just to keep it focused, and they only included one book from every series. To me, good list. They set out guidelines to make it very strict. We might not end up liking these statistics because they reflect on the bigger problem in reading about how people don't read diversely, don't think about reading diversely. There's a couple authors that are more popular even though we're not including multiple books from different series. There's a particular author on here that appears multiple times. Like, it's not the best list because it's repeating authors, but hey, I can't get mad at it because they use good parameters and they're using statistics, reader statistics, versus making a curated list and saying this is the best of the century or whatever. So I'm not mad at this list, but this is where I start to like go, huh? Because it starts to unravel very quickly. For Era Explorer, for the history challenge, it's the past 5 years now. Okay, why? Why is that? That's what I want to know. To me, it seems like, especially because I was reading every description that these people wrote for these posts, it seems like every single challenge was written by a different person. Yeah, I guess that happens at a workplace. You know, we always joke about there being only one person working at Goodreads, but there are multiple people, it seems. But there's no consistency in how they wrote each article, and there's no consistency in the stats they used. You would think you'd want to use the past 3 years for every single challenge. Keep it consistent. These were the top books of the last 3 years for every single genre. I don't know who decided to do it this way, but it's okay. The Era Explorer one is fine. There's a little bit more diversity on this list, which I was happy to see. And while the parameters were different, the parameters seem to work with curating a good reading list based on statistics of their readers. And then we get into the essential readers. I get why they were a little bit more hands-on with that. That makes sense. It kind of wrecks the list from being similar. I think we can all understand why they wanted to curate a specific list for this. This list is hella long, which is good and bad. Good because it gives readers a lot of options, but it's weird to me that the historical one seems to have about 70 books, the fantasy one seems to have about 50 books, and then the Black authors one seems to have like 200 books. Like, that's a big difference. And I'm not saying that's bad, I do wish there was some consistency here. And with the essential authors, we are back to the last 3 years, which I do appreciate. I think that was really smart of them to do it that way, but it makes me wonder why the Epic Explorer couldn't also be 3 years, just again, for consistency's sake. That's what's driving me nuts about these lists, is that there is no kind of consistency in how things are curated. Every single list has an article that's written with a very different tone. The taglines are just very different across all of these things. And then we get to the Sweet and Spicy one, which was just released, and woof. Oh my god. It is just such a bad list. And I know it's based off of stats, but again, there was curation with the other lists, which made decent statistic lists in my opinion, whereas this one is so bad. And again, I know it's based on readers. A lot of people in the comments of this article were like, hey, don't get mad at this. This is based on reader statistics. Get mad at readers, blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry. This is a bad list because there was no curation. I don't understand why they couldn't take a nod from the Epic Reader Quest one and only include one book from every single series. They don't do that here. For the Sweet and Spicy Challenge, it is the top 100 books. That's how they name it, the top 100 books by readers over the last 3 years with a 4-star or higher. Again, it's sticking with the last 3 years, which gives us a little bit more consistency with some of the other lists. It's ruling out anything that is a low star rating, and it's a good round number of 100. Thank you. But the list, oh boy, it is so bad. There are multiple authors on here that are included multiple times. There are multiple books from the same series, and it makes a really bad list because I believe I counted 3 authors of Asian descent. Really, only 2 authors of Asian descent. There was Anna Huang, who was counted multiple times on the list, and then there are 2 Black authors, and there is 1 queer book in the entire thing. Just one. I know it's based off of reading statistics, but if you whittled it down to only including the first book in a series, if you whittled it down to only including 1 title by the author, the most popular title by one author, you could have made a much better list. I'm sure that some other more interesting picks could have rose to the surface. So that's the thing for me, because I want to complete this challenge, and I'm looking at the Sweet and Spicy list going, I don't want to read a damn thing on this list. It is so disappointing and bad. And when I was looking at the Sweet and Spicy list in particular, that's where it gets interesting, because above every little book it says if this book book is a Kindle Unlimited release or not. The Kindle Unleashes are very popular. I know they're especially very, very popular with the romance community. I get the appeal of them, but it's also like, my gears are turning. This is making sense. When you look at a whole list of Kindle Unlimited, they're drawing you guys in. They're taking your money. They found you guys and they're gonna get you. Because once I saw this list, I'm like, it is all making sense now. It just all makes sense. Like I said, I'm competitive. I want to read these books. I want to get my special little bookmark, but I also want to talk about these lists because it is interesting. If these are the real statistics of what people are reading on Goodreads, this is interesting. It's sad. It's disappointing in a lot of ways, but it is interesting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read a book from each of these bookmarks. We are going to discuss the bookmarks in full. I'm going to really get into the statistics here. I have my brief opinion on these lists, but I'm going to break them down. I'm going to make some pie charts. We're going to discuss them. So yeah, look forward to what I'm about to start because it is something. So let's look at what I'm planning on reading. So Buzzy Books, it is broken down to genres. It's the top 12 books of every single genre they included, and they're the most read books of 2024. This list I don't think is bad. There are diverse titles on here. It's a lot of white women, which I think makes sense for the readers of Goodreads and in general, but I don't think these statistics are far from reality because even though they're statistics does not mean that they are a perfect representation. I don't hate these. They're not the worst, except for the part where I'm not really interested in most of these books, but I have read a couple of these. So these were the top books of 2024, but only 2 of them were books that I read in 2024, which would be All Systems Red, Chain Gang All-Stars. And Chain Gang All-Stars was my favorite book of 2024, so glad to see it here. Like I said, there aren't a ton of books that I'm super interested on this list, but there are a couple. I Who Have Never Known Men is on my list, Sea of Tranquility. I got Heartstopper in the young adult category. I have The 100 Years War on Palestine, as well as Poverty in America and Art Thief. I'm really set on reading The 100 Years War on Palestine. Going into Epic Quest Fantasy, this is my genre of choice. I've read a lot on here, and there's a lot of choices on here for things I'm interested in. Nettle and Bone, The Will of the Many, The Book That Wouldn't Burn, Blood Sister Scribe, A Marvelous Light, Karike, which again, fiction book, so is that here besides it being slightly magical. Thistlefoot, The Tainted Cup, Her Majesty's Royal Coven, The Spear Cuts Through Water. There's a lot of good stuff on here, but because it's on my physical TBR, I have to pick A Marvelous Light. Epic Explorer is the one that really struck me as difficult because there's just a lot I don't want to read on here. I've only read The Nickel Boys, and the rest of it are books like I'm sure I would enjoy, but I'm not necessarily looking into reading at this time because it is not my genre of choice. So I chose The Lost Apothecary because I heard it was gay. The Essential Reader tag was a very interesting one to me because it introduced me to a lot of books that I hadn't heard of before. I read Chain Gang All-Stars on it, but I really haven't read anything else. So I'm really interested in this list because it's all new stuff, and it's a lot of stuff that wasn't on my radar previously. But there were a couple titles that interest me, such as Sky Full of Elephants, These Letters End in Tears, Little Rot, The Last American, The Message, as well as a few Rules for Predicting the Future by Octavia Butler. But my choice for now is going to be The Last American because I've wanted to read Taylor for a while now and just haven't got to his first book. So seeing this one on here, I am interested in picking that one up. And then we get to the sweet and spicy list, which I've already had my opinions on as being the worst list here. So really there's not a lot I'm interested in. I was kind of interested in Mercy Heart. I was kind of interested in The Spell Shop, but both of those have really long wait lists at the library, so they might be out. I've only read one book on this list, so I have lots to choose from. The one book that I have read on this list is the gay one, which is not surprising. I'm not really sticking it to Amazon. I guess I am in the fact that I'm not buying my books on Amazon or on Kindle Unlimited, but in my heart of hearts, this is sticking it to them, is gonna reread the book that I actually enjoy, the only one I'm truly interested in on the list, and that's Delilah Green Doesn't Care. I like this book a lot. A lot of people don't, but I like this book a lot. And so for it to be the only gay book on the list is just really interesting to me. It's not surprising because it's like the only lesbian romance book to ever get any kind of acclaim, but it is interesting that it's there nonetheless. So those are my opinions so far on the list. Those are kind of my thoughts for what I'm going to be reading. So I will see you again very soon when I have some statistics, when we can get enmeshed in this list and we can discuss it more fully, because I'm excited to talk about things across these lists. So let's get started. Are we ready to talk about Goodreads? For the past couple weeks, I have been reading the books on the Goodreads challenges, and I've also been taking this time to curate some spreadsheets. I learned some new things on Google Docs and Excel that I did not know how to do before this video, but I do know now. So I want to run through the statistics for each one of these challenges, just to kind of get a feel for where these challenges succeeded and where they did not. And then we can kind of go over some overall stats. So we're going to talk about one of of the outliers first, which is the Buzzy Books challenge. So the Buzzy Books achievement is the first achievement that was released. When you click on the Buzzy Books bookmark, it says Buzzworthy. Collect this achievement by completing a reader's favorite. And then when you click on the qualifying books, you're given an article, and it's called the 144 Most Read Books of 2024 Reading Challenge. This was actually released in December, so it gave us a lot of time to get used to this challenge. So I'm going to just read the article before we get into the statistics. So it says, Goodreads regulars will be aware that our 2024 Reading Challenge is coming to a glorious conclusion with the ringing of the new year. This is, of course, our annual group reading exercise in which members pledge to read a certain number of books over the course of the calendar year. Think of it as a fitness class for book nerds. Well, the numbers are in, and they're kind of eye-popping. More than 9 million readers signed up to read more than 356 million books in the year of 2024. It's inspirational. It's aspirational. It's amazing. Perhaps you're curious, which books are the most popular in this year's reading challenge? We are curious too. Below are the top 12 books marked as read by participants in this year's challenge, sorted by genre. Scroll around and you'll see the several familiar names placed multiple books in this collection, some across different genres. R.F. Kuang, Alex Michaelides, I'm definitely pronouncing that wrong, Ali Hazelwood, Taylor Jenkins Reid, David Graham, Sarah J. Maas. Quite a few hugely popular and recent books made the charts too. Barbara Kingsglove, the Pulitzer Prize winning Demon Copperhead, and James McBride, the Kirkus Prize winner, The Heavens and Earth Grocery Store. There is also a fun scattering of old genre classics, high school English class favorites, popular memoirs, modern queer fiction classics, deeply weird true stories, and even a bit of fan fiction. Plus, of course, you'll find the enduring delights of hockey romance. Click on the book's cover for more information about each title and use the Want to Read button if you already are thinking of reading this for 2025. As an article, I think this is fine. I feel like it has the right tone, as in there's a little bit of playfulness. It's a good call to what this article is talking about with it coming to the end of the year and what people are reading. To set up a reading challenge, I think this lays out everything that I want. It tells me how many books are in this challenge. It tells me how it came to get these statistics. And so even though this is one of the outliers because it's not one genre specific, it's a good introduction into the new year by laying out what books were popular in 2024. And my initial conclusion when looking at it was the same. I thought this was good. Getting into the statistics, things got a little interesting here. So basically for every title, I included the statistics for the author. I wanted to look at what genre this was marked as on the list and if this genre was a correct choice or not. And then for the author stats, I was looking at ethnicity, nationality, gender, queerness. These stats, basically I was using author bios for, so there's definitely some wiggle room where things were probably not categorized correctly. For queerness especially, I was really looking at if this book was categorized as queer or LGBT. So these stats are not necessarily the most true, but it's what I could pull. Let's just remember I did this for 5 lists. Some of them have over 200 titles. As a non-stats person, this is a decent statistic, but it's probably not all the way fully 100% accurate. Grain of salt. But then I also looked at if this is a book I had read, and then if this was on my TBR, because I was using this for the purpose of picking a read to read so that I could get the bookmark. So it acknowledges this in the article, but there are some authors that pop up multiple times, which we can see in this pie chart. The most read author of 2024, according to the statistics, is Sarah J. Maas. I think she was counted in the fantasy category several times. She was counted in the young adult several times. I believe there is a romantasy category in there as well, so she was counted there several times. But there was also R.F. Kuang with 3 books, as well as Taylor Jenkins Reid with 3 books. All 3 of these authors make sense to me. They're very popular authors. They have several books that are very popular, and they all have the opportunity to come up multiple times because of different genres. But there's also authors that came up multiple times on the list, like Kristen Hanna, Friedrich McFadden, Alex Michaelides, Nita Prose, Madeline Miller, Rebecca Yarros, Hannah Grace, Emily Henry, Anna Huang, Ali Hazelwood, Rebecca Ross, David Gran. If this list wanted to be better, it could have only included 1 book from each author and said we're not going to acknowledge the second book that comes up. That would have been a better choice in my opinion, but they didn't do that. You'll see there are more egregious lists where this gets a lot worse, so this is not the worst one with repeating authors. So this list was kind of broken up into like mini micro lists. They picked an array of different genres, and for each genre there were 12 books categorized under that as the most popular or most read book of 2024 within that genre. So we have fiction, historical fiction, mystery thriller, fantasy, romantasy, sci-fi, sci-fi, horror, romance, young adult, memoirs, history or biography, and then general nonfiction. Those categories make sense to me. They are the most read genres. Any more genres and it gets a little bit too niche, too specific. This also seems to reflect a lot of the genre choices that you have for the Goodreads Choice Awards. Where genre gets a little funky for me, it has to be based on Amazon, like some type of algorithm deciding like a book like The Midnight Library, which is kind of multi-genre, is going to be placed as a fantasy book versus a fiction book. And to me, that is what's really interesting, because obviously in a physical brick and mortar bookstore, you can only put a book in one place, or you really should only put it in one place so that booksellers and customers can find the book. And so there is one definitive genre for every book, no matter if the book could be placed in multiple categories. This is also how books are marketed. You know, you have specific publishing houses that are publishing fiction books, and they're gonna market their books under the genre of the publisher. So again, going back to The Midnight Library, if you go into a bookstore, you're going to see it categorized in the fiction section, and it's going to be published by a fiction publishing house, and it's going to be marketed as a fiction book, even if it has magical realism or speculative elements. But with a digital buying space, that obviously doesn't matter. You're trying to ping as many different people as you can, and that's where you get those really long, ridiculous titles on different shopping websites where it like is listing everything that it could possibly be, because it's just trying to algorithm you into finding their thing and buying their thing. And so this is where the problem lies, because some human or some algorithm has decided that The Midnight Library, actually it's going to be categorized as the #1 read fantasy book, even when most people probably wouldn't think of it as a straight fantasy novel, because that's not where it's put in a bookstore. And so this is where the problems really came in. So in my statistics, I looked through and decided when a book was miscategorized, and I've made a pie chart for it. So out of the 144 books, I thought 16 books were miscategorized. This again is based on my own knowledge, so there could be some that are miscategorized, but like 11% being wrong, it's a pretty big chunk of books where you're seeing those titles, these incorrect categorizations, are mostly going to be in genre: horror, sci-fi, and fantasy. And what's happening is, instead of those books being placed in the fiction category, those books are taking over a slot from the genre categories and replacing a book title. And so that's where it gets me. It's like, The Midnight Library is not the top book among fantasy readers, it's the top book among general fiction readers. It shouldn't be in the fantasy category, and you're kicking out somebody else that could be up here. So I know Circe and The Song of Achilles are popular. Even with Circe, there's barely little magic. It's more mythology based. It's just weird that it's here kicking out a more popular fantasy title. Like, I'm not a Brandon Sanderson reader really much anymore, but it is strange that he's not here. Especially when we get to the fantasy category, you'll see how widely popular he is. And the other incorrect thing that got placed on this list for me, besides the incorrect books, was Manacled was on here. There's been other discussions about this, I know, but fanfiction should really not be rated on Goodreads. Manacled was taken and made into a book, I believe, or it is being made into a book. Let's wait until that actual physical book gets published and we can rate that and make that the top thing. Some of my favorite things are fanfiction, but they should not be on Goodreads. And so while there were a lot of mistakes, I believe, in the fantasy and science fiction category, I feel like horror suffered the most. Like Our Wives Under the Sea, Mexican Gothic, Frankenstein, a lot of stuff that really should be in the literary fiction came over and took away spots from horror. And it's not like these books aren't horror or don't have horror elements. I just don't think it's fair to like the hardcore horror fans that their popular picks are getting pushed out by the more palatable picks or the more literary leaning picks, because I, as a genre fan, think that genre is just as important and can do just as good stuff as literary fiction. So that's where the thing happens for me that I don't like. But let's get over to read. So out of the 144 books, I have read only 18 of them, which is 12%. But I also know, like, I don't always align with what's popular, so it makes sense to me that I haven't read a lot, because when we move over to my TBR list, I don't want to read, or I wasn't super interested in 114 of these books. For this statistic, I really only categorize something as my TBR if I physically owned it, or if I had saved it or put it in my wish list on the library. I really try to avoid even books that I was slightly interested in, just to get a more accurate depiction of like what I actually wanted to read from this list. There's only 9 some books that really, really piqued my interest that I had on my physical TBR, that I had on my reading list. Is this a good TBR list for the average individual? Possibly, especially if it's somebody that is new to reading, that wants to read what's popular, that wants to read across genre, or just wants to look at what the most popular book in their favorite genre is. Very nichely interested in a specific genre. These books might not be your cup of tea. They might not be interesting to you just because they are the most popular, and they became the most popular because they are palatable to a wide array of people. That's not a bad thing at all. It's just, you've read a lot, you know your tastes, and you know where you deviate from the common person. This list is probably not a good indication of what I want to read, but, you know, going through the list, really looking at it and investigating each thing, I don't think it's a bad list necessarily. It makes sense. They're books that I was seeing a lot, that a lot of people were reading. But let's talk about author stats, because this is what I was really curious about. On this Buzzy Books list, 124, 86%, almost 87% are white authors. I don't blame this list necessarily for having that problem. And again, this list was curated relatively well, so I think the statistic isn't technically wrong necessarily. I think it is an indication of a bigger issue with readers just kind of reading the same things and not reading diversely. So the thing is, if you don't want to read diversely, I really don't care in the grand scheme of things. So to me, reading is a lot more interesting though when you're reading stories from a lot of different perspectives, when you're not reading the same thing over and over again. And the way that we read something that's different, the way that we get to experience books that are not the same to our own experiences or not the same thing over and over again, is from reading from a wide array of people that have different life experiences from you. And that includes reading from people that are just different types of people. Yeah, not every white person has experienced the same life, but it's also like, let's be truthful about this. If you're reading from a wide array of people that come from different ethnic and national backgrounds, you're going to experience different stories. And they might be even stories that you have a lot of commonality with, but they're going to be different. They're going to come from a different place. They're going to approach things differently. This list just really reflects the problem that we as readers and Goodreads has of not wanting to read from different experiences. But for that 13% of non-white books, again, there were 3 African American books on here. There was 1 African book. There was one Indigenous book. There was a smattering of Asian, mostly East Asian, and there were just a couple from Central and South America. And then when we get to nationality, we can see the problem again, because it's 74, almost 75% of reading is just American. This is a problem I myself have. When we get outside of America, most of the books people are reading, the other 9% is British. We have 2 books from Ireland. We have 2 from Australia. We have 7 from Canada, and just a very small smattering of people from different countries entirely that do not speak English primarily. And so for me, this was really interesting to see, because I know this is a problem I want to change. I want to read more translated books. I want to read more books from authors from different countries. I'm glad there are some authors on here that I haven't seen represented before. There's some books now that I'm going to look towards, but also this is like a thing that I hope maybe we could all work towards. And then when we get into gender, this was not a surprise for me. I knew that there was going to be a majority women authorship here, just based on readers, Goodread users, and authors. So we had 67%. But what really helped the male authors out is the nonfiction categories. I believe nonfiction is considered to be like more serious, more informational, less emotional. So there is a wide array of men authors and men readers in that genre. And so the nonfiction genre really helped the men kind of compete with women. And I was excited to see that there were a couple authors on here that are gender nonconforming in some way. I would love to see more people like that, obviously with everything going on, but I was glad that they were not there. And then when we go to queerness, this is based off of if the book itself is categorized as LGBT. I did not base it off on author, and I had to base it off a little bit of my own knowledge. 15 of the book had queer elements or queer main characters, while 10% makes sense. I didn't think it would be that much higher. So that's what we're kind of looking at. I feel like Buzzy Books gives a good general kind of introduction to the problems of these lists while doing a good job of categorizing the readers of Goodreads. It is American based, it is English reading based, which makes sense. This is an American website by an American company, and we're seeing it reflected in the statistics. And so like a lot of the problems that we see on this list are going to start appearing again in the rest of them. So I've already read and collected my book bookmark for this challenge. The 100 Years' War on Palestine was a part of the history biography section, and it just snuck on there. I feel like a lot of people started reading this book in October, November. I'm not sure if it was recommended on NPR, if it was just because that's when the war on Gaza was really coming to a head in the news, and that's when people started getting interested in learning about the topic. But this is a book from 2019. And so it is a couple years old now, and it's the history of Palestine from like 1912 to 2017. For something that only became really, really popular late in the year, it is nice to see it be able to get on this list. And, you know, just working in a bookstore, I know how many copies we sold of this. It was selling like crazy. So yes, this is a good representation of a book that became popular and was getting a mass readership. And I think it's really interesting to look for the history nonfiction section, because with fiction it makes sense. It's a new book, or it's a book that became popular on TikTok or YouTube or wherever, most likely TikTok. It's a book with a wide readership. It's a book with an author that is really popular. So it makes sense. It goes viral. It becomes popular. It gets on this list. With nonfiction, yes, there is a little bit of that, but nonfiction is not as popular as fiction. And so what gets put on the nonfiction list for this? It's biographies of famous people, history, or just like general nonfiction that is popular with a wide range of people. It's books that have been made into movies. I'm thinking of Killer of the Flower Moon, which was the #1 read book for this category. Also just like self-help books. But for history biography, what we see making it on this list is a book that is popular just because of what's going on in the world. I found that interesting, and this is also a topic that I wanted to read more about. It was a book that was on my digital TBR at the library, and so to me, all the cards aligned where I wanted to pick this book up. And so yes, this is a history book. It is a little bit about the author, his knowledge on things because he was there at different meetings and things, but it is mostly just a history of Palestine, and it reads like a history book. If you're just trying to get the information on the subject, it's good for that. So I'm glad that this is up here. I don't want it to be replaced. I'm hoping we can get more books on this list from Palestinian authors, both fiction and nonfiction. I personally left this as a non-rated book. I didn't feel like it was appropriate to rate it, but I will say I got what I wanted to get out of this book. I learned about the subject. I learned a different perspective that I hadn't previously known. And so the Buzzy Books challenge, I feel like, was well earned. I challenged myself to read something that was on my TBR, was a popular book that I was anticipating reading because of its popularity. And I got to move it up to the top of my TBR and read it because I was looking to fulfill this challenge. So Buzzy Books, not super remarkable as a challenge. It set out to do what it needed and wanted to do. It makes sense for the most part. Curation could have been a little bit higher, especially with those repetitive authors, but it's not the worst. So let's talk about the Epic Quest Challenge. So Epic Quest is the second bookmark that was released, and it is titled Epic Quest. You collected this achievement by completing one of the most loved fantasy titles. As a tagline, I don't think that's quite as polished as the Buzzy one, but let's look to the article. The 60 most popular fantasy novels of the past 3 years. And this was published by Sharon on July 5th of 2024, which is quite early, earlier than the last one. I can only assume that this did not become a bookmark achievement until the new year, and that they were just introducing these books ahead of time, these articles ahead of time. Let me go back to Buzzy and let's see who made that one. Oh, I was right. This is made by Sybil. Buzzy Books was made by Sybil. I have it confirmed. Different people were writing these, but now I have it confirmed. I feel so good because I knew the tones were different. These people have to be like either remote workers, I don't know, freelance people. Like none of these people are working together to make these lists or talking about it. There's no consistency, and Amazon did not care to give us consistency. Sharon writes, dedicated fantasy readers are a voracious lot. We read like there's no tomorrow, in part because we have to. Fantasy books have a famous tendency for longish page counts, and any given novel is usually part of a longer series anyway. As such, today's Spotlight collection, the most popular fantasy novels on Goodreads in the past 3 years, may set a record for total pages. We got the subcomputer chewing on these numbers right now, and it's taking a while. The collection below features the most popular fantasy titles published between July 2021 and June 2024, as measured by Goodreads members, ratings and reviews, as well as their read and want to read shelves. Each book has an average star rating of 3.5 or higher. To narrow the focus, we excluded YA fantasy and books typically slotted with the romantasy distinction or designation. For series with multiple qualifying books in our 3-year time span, we included whichever book was the most popular overall. You'll find plenty of familiar authors' names below, including genre aces like Leigh Bardugo, Holly Black, N.T. Jemisin, T.J. Klune, and Brandon Sanderson. The nice thing about fantasy, of course, is that you can choose destinations from across the multiverse. Vinisha Patel's Kake, for instance, features a kingdom based on the Hindu epic. R.F. Kuang's brilliant Babel features a devastating alternate history approach. Colonial-era British Empire. Who knows what Stephen King is up to? Click the book covers and images for more information about each title, and add any interesting books to your want to read shelf. Feel free to continue the discussion in the comments section. Please remember to play nice. Be the comment section you want to see in the world. Thank you, Sharon. I think as an article, this is fine. Similar-ish tone to Buzzy, a little bit more playful, but I feel like it's not bad. And as I've already discussed, this list is not my least favorite. It clearly defines how many books are on this list. There is a clear definition for how books got on this list. There is curation. Even though this is based on stats, there is curation here. We're only using books that have a certain overall rating. We're only using books one per series, and we're using only books from the past 3 years. So that's giving us a good-ish look into the top fantasy books of the past 3 years. It also kicked out YA, it kicked out romantasy, so we can be singly focused on the fantasy. And yet still, a couple weird ones snuck up on here. I'm mostly looking at you, Stephen King. I don't think you should be here. You're categorized in horror. I don't care if there's a fantasy element here. It shouldn't be here. And like Buzzy books, there are also some literary picks that snuck in here. I like literary in my genre fiction, but if we're talking about the best books, I don't think the fiction picks need to be here. This has to do with Amazon categorization versus a brick and mortar bookstore. Like Nora Roberts, why you here, girl? You should be in romance, especially because she just said everything about the romantasy thing. But let's look to the stats, to the spreadsheet, if you will, because of course, being the fantasy reader I am, this ended up being the first book that I read for this video. In the 60 authors, we have a couple of repeats. I liked that we curated on series, but I think we also could have curated on authors. There's only 60 slots. That's not a lot. Maybe we should have whittled it down and kicked out having the same author multiple times. Maybe we should have just included their most popular pick of the last 3 years. So Brandon Sanderson, he ended up here 4 times. Did he really need to be up here 4 times? No, we know how popular he is. But Leigh Bardugo also got on here twice. T. Kingfisher ended up on here, and Jennifer Saint, who is a author of the literary fiction picks, who I don't think should have ended up on here, got to be represented twice because of the curation. And I think that's the biggest issue, is that when there's a mistake, in my opinion, can get overrepresented because there wasn't any kind of fail-safe to keep the list particular, to keep it curated. When we get into other lists, this is not the worst by a long shot. Besides Brandon Sanderson, the authors are not overrepresented. We're not seeing the same people repeating over and over and over again. For the most part, we're only seeing one book by each author. But let's get into genre. Like I said, there are a couple books that I don't think really should have been on this list. But also, what I love about fantasy is that it can really encompass a wide array of genres and styles and choices. There's so many little subgenres in here. Fantasy can be set in its own world, but it can also be set in ours. And so I tried to break that down into a subgenre category. So for straight fantasy, there's only about 18 books that I would actually categorize as straight fantasy and like nothing else. The biggest category ended up actually being paranormal or urban. I know paranormal is its own thing, but basically anything that was happening in our world that had a fantastical element that was not historical fiction or mythology, I put it in its own category just to distinguish it. For the paranormal, urban, anything that was happening in our world, there were 13 books, 2 over any traditional other world fantasy. I should also mention that I learned a new trick for this spreadsheet. I gave books multiple subcategories. So don't worry, everything is represented here. I didn't have to choose one subcategory for each pick. So if a book was urban and also historical, it is represented in here. So the next biggest genre is that historical fiction, like traditional fantasy. There are 11 books for this. Literary fiction books, I counted 8 that shouldn't have been on this list. Cozy fantasy is getting more popular, but there were only 3 books that really made it up here. We had one horror with Stephen King. Again, what you doing here, girl? They said they cut out the romantasy, but I counted at least 5 books that had a strong romantasy subcategory, or I technically think were a romantasy. Dark academia, like cozy fantasy, is another popular subgenre. I counted 3. And mythology, another very popular thing in the last couple years. There were 5 books for that. But let's go to should it be here? And then this is the problem. Like Buzzy books, a lot of books that shouldn't have been categorized as fantasy, shouldn't have been categorized as sci-fi, been a literary fiction or general fiction pick, they ended up here. 73% the picks were correct. They should have been in here. They're categorized as a fantasy book in the bookstore, which leaves 16 books, or 26% of the books on this list should not have been here. That is crazy. That is way too big of a margin. You're like, Courtney, it doesn't matter. Why should I care? It's because there's only 60 slots. Why am I seeing a literary fiction pick? I'm not one to limit genre fiction to not be literary. That's not what I'm talking about here. This one, it wasn't on the list. It was a Buzzy problem, but like Circe, I feel like sums up my opinions for all of these other mythology books that ended up here. They're not fantasy books. They're literary fiction. They should be on the literary fiction list. And the reason why they're kicking out some other popular fantasy picks is because they have more wide appeal. I just want to see my genre represented correctly. But this is my category. Like I said, these are the books I want to read. And I have read a fair few of them. I've read 9, which is 15%. That's nothing to scoff at. That's not bad. And for my TBR, while there is 38 books that didn't really interest me, probably a lot of the literary fiction picks, there are 13 books that I still have on my physical TBR, or I have on my digital TBR. Just about 20% or 22% are books that I am interested in. So as a fantasy fan, I can say this is a representative list. Sure, I'm not going to be interested in every single fantasy title, but there is a lot here that I am interested in. And let's get into the author stats. We have similar problems to Buzzy. 71% of reading is by white authors. About 30% is from diverse readers or non-white authors. What I do like about the fantasy diversity here in that 30% is that there is a wide range of different people. There are 5 Chinese authors. There is 1 indigenous, there is 1 Ecuadorian, there is 1 Kuwait, there is an Indian Filipino author, as well as 2 just Filipino authors and 3 Indian authors, and there are 2 Malaysian authors. We're definitely skewing Asian influence, but at least we are getting both East Asian and South Asian in there. There is one I skipped over, and that's African American. We have 1 African American author on this 60 book list, and it is N.K. Jemisin, which is really bad because I feel like a lot of Black authors, African American authors, they have made this genre, they have accelerated it, and we're not seeing a lot of Central or South American either, which I'd like to see more of. Nationality, again, it's not quite as strong as Buzzy, but there are some problems here, being that there's 70% American authors. The other big chunks that we're seeing are British, Australian, and Canadian. So maybe this is a bigger problem in publishing than just readers itself. We're not seeing a lot of translated books in popularity, we're not seeing a lot of translated books. It really is English-centric over here in Fantasyland, which is interesting because I feel like fantasy tends to want to be these otherworldly places. It wants to explore different cultures in a different setting or take inspiration from different cultures, and we're not seeing that represented by the authors themselves. Gender is much like Buzzy. The percentage is going to go to women. I feel like fantasy is a little bit of a boys' game, but it's interesting that readership is not supporting in a lot of ways. Like they're here, 26%, but they're not dominating. But I was happy to see that we have a couple trans and non-binary voices on here because that's my favorite type of fantasy, is fantasy with a little bit of gay stuff. But if we head over to queerness, this is not bad. 11 of the books, or 18%, have queer main characters. Another 11%, or 18 of the books, have queer characters present, and 63% are absent from LGBT representation, or I just didn't know enough about the books to include them in that statistic. But from my research, this is what it breaks down to. So a little under 40%. Not awful. Like I said, there were 13 books that I was interested in. For this challenge, of course, I had to pick the book that was on my physical TBR because that's what this challenge is about. It's about reading things that you're interested in, things on your TBR. Yes, I know they're trying to get you to add books, they're trying to get you to buy new books, see what's popular and buy them, but I'm using this as a chance to read what I'm already interested in. And luckily for me, a book I owned was on that list, and that is A Marvelous Light by Freya Marksey. And this is the first book in a fantasy trilogy. This is historical fiction, it is paranormal fantasy, it's set in our world with just a little bit of a fantastical, magical edge. It is a world where magic is hidden from the mundane society and kind of run by a secret underground, mainly nobility-based society. It is gay, and it has a pretty big, strong romance subplot. So in this book, we are following Robin. He's kind of struggling. Both of his parents just passed away. He has to care for his younger sister, and he has to now be the manager of his estate and his title. He just does not have the money to do that well right now. His parents left him in a difficult place, and somehow his government job that he got is working for the Magic Bureau, which he has no knowledge of and is just learning about for the first time. He gets wrapped up into this magical plot, and suddenly he's thrust into this world and has to contend with it and solve this magical mystery. And then we have Edwin, who is a magic user. He is very much a part of the secret society, but he's very uptight. He's very much about doing things in his specific way with magic, but he is not considered a high magic user. And so both of them are dealing with a lot of external issues, family issues. They are dealing with this murder mystery plot together, trying to solve it. There's the historical Regency manners and rules, as well as like the forbidden romance of obviously gay men cannot public in the society. So it's just a lot of different things that fit my personal taste. I'm a sucker for Regency. This is technically Edwardian, I believe, but it still has a little bit of that manners and rules of the Regency. This was just a recipe of everything that I would like in a fantasy, in a more romance-leaning fantasy, and I really enjoyed this. It also just set us up for a bigger story here. There are 3 books in this series. Each are following different characters, but I believe they're following a similar mystery or bigger story here of what they're trying to uncover. So in terms of like fantasy book with a strong romance plot, this does everything that I would want it to, being it has developed characters that are dealing with problems. It has very fun, playful characters that have a good dynamic. It has a lot of attention to the relationship they're building, and it kind of closes off a mystery while leaving doors open for more possibilities. Overall, this was enjoyable and just what I want, and I'm excited to read the rest of this series. So yes, this was on my TBR. It was something I wanted to read this year, so I'm glad I got to read it and get that bookmark. And as far as the achievement goes, not the worst, not the best. But let's get into eras and discuss what went on with the historical fiction. I think we're ready to discuss our era explorers. And one thing I notice every time I'm sitting down to film these is that, oh my god, why does Goodreads make it so difficult to get to each achievement? Both on desktop and the phone, but especially the phone, it is so hard to get to achievements. And of course it like backs it out of the article all the time, so you have to like go through the motions again to get back to the screen. Let's look at the eras explorer. So it says you collect this achievement by completing a popular historical fiction novel. So a look back at 5 years of historical fiction hits by our good friend Sybil. Let's read the article. A young duchess navigates treacherous palace intrigue in Renaissance Italy. A black cake recipe passes through history to unite fracturing Caribbean families. 5 courageous women in Depression-era Alpacia spread hope and literature in this amazing true story of the Packhorse Librarians of Kentucky. Such are the narratives and destinations available in today's collection of books, in which we sort out Goodreads' most popular historical fiction novels of the past 5 years. The titles listed below have been selected by tracking overall readers, reviews, ratings, and shelves. That is to say which books end up on Goodreads reads and want to read shelves. The books are presented in order of overall popularity, with the most popular books on top. Also, each of the titles has earned the average rating of 3.5 stars or higher. I don't think we need the fussiness of the first part of the article, but I like that we set out everything. But what's interesting that this list enacts where I don't know if they do it on any of the other lists. This is listed from most popular to least popular. But let's continue. Habitual historical fiction readers will recognize some familiar names here. Goodreads members clearly have some favorite authors in particular: Kristen Hanna, Taylor Jenkins Reid, Kate Quinn, and Lisa C, to name 4. You'll see some genres crossover specimens too, like Andrew Dora's Cloud Cuckoo Land, which incorporates historical, contemporary, and sci-fi elements. Also look for acclaimed writers for other fields trying historical fiction for the first time. For instance, Ta-Nehisi Coates' frankly amazing novel, The Water Dancer. Click on the book cover images for more details about each title and add any good leads to your want to read shelf. Actually, we might add that this collection features some particularly excellent book cover art and design. The one thing I don't like about this, obviously, it's not 100 books. It doesn't say how many books there are, so we cannot keep things the same. And I'm guessing that this is from the last 5 years because 3 wasn't enough books. But again, it's not keeping things organized and neat and tidy. But let's look at this top 10 because this is the first time that a list has gone in sequential alphabetical order, the top 10 is interesting, mostly because there is one Black author to my knowledge and all white authors from there. It's all women authors. There are repeat authors even. Kristen Hanna listed twice in the top 10. Taylor Jenkins Reid rated twice. And then Lessons in Chemistry, which obviously got a movie TV show adaptation, which makes it so popular. But we have one male author. So even though this is one of the most diverse lists, as we'll get into, it doesn't speak great volumes that we are just so white heavily in the most popular picks, which are obviously the picks that are going to be read from people outside the historical fiction genre because they appeal or have been recommended, whatever, to just everybody, not just historical fiction fans. Like, these books made it into the top 100 because they are more readable or more commercial to a bigger audience. If you look at the top 10, these are like considered the most commercial, the biggest hitters. Yeah, it's interesting to say the least. It's from popular authors, it's from people that have book clubs, and it's a lot of white. And the other thing that I think is interesting about this top 10 is that it really boils down into how different historical fiction novels can be. There's either the literary or hard-hitting books, or there's the drama, intrigue, or romance-based books, which are the more commercially accessible books. I don't think either are bad, but I know what camp I fall into and what I would read. I'm not a big historical fiction person, but if I was reading one, I personally would want to read a more literary, hard-hitting one. But I do think it's so interesting that this genre in particular feels so divided, probably because it's on the cusp of genre and literary fiction. But let's get into some stats so I can discuss some of my other thoughts. So the authors. This list I think is one of the best from not having authors overrepresented. Yes, they let authors on here a couple times. They didn't try to limit authors, but at least it's not so noticeable in the graphs, unlike some other lists. So Kate Quinn, 3 times on this list. Kristen Harmel, 3 times on this list. Other people that come up here more than once: Taylor Jenkins Reid, Kristen Hanna, Maggie O'Farrell, Colson Whitehead, James McBride, Lisa C., Isabel Adele, Saquiel Johnson, and Ariel Lawhorn. So we see some repeats. What can you do at this point? It's not the worst. Getting into my personal reads and TBR, I have read 2 of these books, which would be The Vanishing Half and The Nickel Boys. Like I said, both hard-hitting historical fictions. So I had a lot of books to choose from for this list, but unfortunately for me, I had no books that I was interested on this list, or no books that I had picked out for my TBR. Like I said, I only based my TBR list on books that I had on my wish list for the library. So some of these I've heard of, some of these I've been interested in, but they hadn't quite made the threshold for me because this is not my area of expertise or focus. And I think that'll be apparent in the book I chose for this challenge. But let's look at the author stats. So like I said, this is one of the author stats that is a little bit better than some of the others. We only have 65% of white authors, and we have almost 20% African American authors. We have 1 African author, 1 Indian author, 2 Chinese, 1 Argentinian, 2 Chilean, 1 Iranian, and 2 indigenous. So there is a lot more diversity here. Even if when we look at it divided, it's pretty sparse in South American and Asian rep. It's a lot better than some of the other lists. As for the nationalities of these authors, of course, there is going to be that 77% American, 3% British, 3 Irish, 4 Australian, 2 Canadian, and 1 Scottish. So there's only 1 Ethiopian and 1 Indian. So really only a couple people coming from non-Western, non-English speaking countries, which, I don't want to say it's a problem necessarily. We've discussed what I feel about it, but what's interesting to me about this list in particular is that when we have non-Western and translated works, whenever they are popular, they tend to be historical picks or literary with some historical elements that make them technically historical fiction. So it's like if any list would have those non-Western voices on them, it would be this list. For them not really to pop up here is quite interesting, to say the least. While I would never harp on an individual for reading the way they want to read, for me, it's important to read that way, to read diversely. So it's not like I'm ever going after specific readers when I'm kind of calling to action, wishing that these lists were better, that our statistics as a group were better. It's more like I'm wanting more from the people around me, from the people that are in this group of readers, this demographic that views themselves as intelligent, that views themselves as literate, that values these things. I think it would also stand to reason that we should value diversity along with those aspects, because that's what would make our society better and more thoughtful, hopefully. And it's why I want more from these lists. Let's get back into eras. If we look at gender, I think it's no surprise that 83% of these books are written by women. Historical fiction is a genre that is very much read by women, so it makes sense that a lot of authors in this genre would also be women. And queerness, there were more than I suspected. Not a lot, 4, but still, there were some books that I didn't know about, which comes into my pick for this. I don't know why I thought it was going to be queer. I think I heard something about that vaguely, but I was wrong. It was not queer. And yeah, I ended up actually reading one of the top 10 books in this list, reading one of the more commercial picks, one of the ones that is built around drama and intrigue versus being a historical, hard-hitting, well-researched type of book. And I ended up reading The Lost Apothecary, which just takes the number 9 slot on the top 10 of this list. As much as I did not enjoy this novel, I feel like it is representative of a good chunk of these historical fiction readers because of its commerciality, because of its very unsubtle use of like feminism, like pop feminism, and just for the kind of plot twisty drama nature of it that would appeal to people that don't go out of their way to read a lot of books, but definitely want like an exciting popcorn kind of beach read. So yeah, The Lost Apothecary. I did not enjoy it. I've done a review for it about my dislike of it. It was just a book that told you everything flat out. There was no kind of showing you anything. It was just all telling. There was no build of information, no build of intrigue or mystery. Big plot twist at the end was just that, just a plot twist. We didn't build towards it in any way. It was just really unremarkable and just not great in both like from a writing standpoint and from like a story standpoint. Very unnuanced, very flat in characters, plot, everything. Not enjoyable, not something I would personally recommend, but I could see why it would be popular. I can see that in my mind's eye. I can see why it would get picked up by a book club, just as like a book of the month pick or something like that. I can see why it would get picked up from that crowd. Not a great book, but I guess it is representative of part of the demographic of the historical fiction crowd. But with that, let's get on to the next achievement, which is going to be the essential readers, which is another one of our outliers because it is the one sole list that was created by a person or a curation team rather by the algorithm or the statistics, as Goodreads says. So the essential reader, you collected this achievement by completing one of these essential books from Black authors. So this was created by our friend Sybil again, and let's get into the article she wrote. So February is Black History Month here in the US, and each year we like to join the celebration with big, bookish lists that will keep you reading long past the end of the month. Loyal readers will recall that last year we gathered together a backlist of essential fiction from Black authors going back a decade or so. This time around we're staying in the moment. Below we've gathered 177 new books from Black authors, fiction and nonfiction, published since the beginning of 2023. This collection cuts across all genre, which makes for a more exhilarating swerve in topics and theme. You might find a debut literary fiction shelved next to a bold dystopian science fiction, or gritty southern noir next to a multi-generational Hollywood epic, vampire dark academia next to sensual contemporary romance. Also on tap, literary horror, popular memoirs, humor writing, speculative westerns, musical biographies, ecological science, and historical scholarship. Several Goodreads Choice Award books, and even a National Book Award winner you may have heard about. If you love reading, there's something here for you. Click on the book cover images for more information about each title, and use the Want to Read button to add to your digital shelf. If you want to read more for Black History Month, the Library of Congress put together a nice collection of links and exhibits. I love that call to action at the end, calling people to do more research and a resource for that. I think it's a good call for this article because Goodreads should not be the be-all and end-all. I think we know that. As far as this one singular person working on these articles for Goodreads, I think Sybil did a great job here, and I'm very happy that they decided to go with the choice of a human rather than picking willy-nilly based on algorithms. One thing that this list really alerted me to is that this is the first list that doesn't take star ratings into account. It's just picking up some of the best and brightest of new fiction by Black authors. For the past couple lists, I've really been like, yes, I'm very happy that they've used star ratings because it's putting not just the most popular books up on this list, but also the most well-liked. But here's the problem with that, is that books by Black authors tend to get lower ratings. They tend to get hate bombed on sites like Goodreads just because they're by Black authors, and there's people out there that will go to these books and purposely give them lower ratings, but people also subconsciously do that with their books too. It just brings a whole nother can of worms to all the lists that we've already previously looked at. Black books unfortunately are not as read as much as books by white authors, so I don't think it would put a lot of books in the running on these lists because they just don't get the same popularity. It's not like if we took a white author off one of the lists that suddenly a Black author would get to slot in there. I think it would be kind of naive to insinuate that, but also Like, yes, we know that's a thing for ratings and for reviews, and not including ratings just like reminded me of that, and I'm just like, oh my god. It really makes me wonder about the other lists. Let's go back to the list itself. This was created by a person. It was created for the last 3 years. It's 177 books covering fiction and nonfiction, and somehow it's still an odd number. Why could we not just have every list be 100 and this one rounded up to 200? Make everything neat and tidy. I don't know. But the other interesting thing before we get into stats is that this is not just American authors. This is from Black voices across the diaspora, as well as Black authors that are still in their native countries. It's interesting because obviously Black History Month is a American holiday celebrating American Black voices. One hand, I'm like, is this the appropriate place to have these other authors here? But we also know that this is going to be the only list that has Black authors majority on them. So I was so excited to see countries represented that we didn't see in a lot of other lists. So it's a give or take with that one. But let's get into these stats. So because this is a person that created this, there's barely any overlap in authors. If an author does repeat, I think James McBride is the only one that repeats with 2 literary picks, but almost everybody else, if there is a repeat, it is 1 memoir or 1 nonfiction and 1 fiction title. But for the most part, it's only 1 book per author, which is something I wish would have repeated on all the lists. Getting into genres, the majority are literary fiction, historical fiction, and memoir, with a good smidgen of nonfiction and essays. And then kind of our genre categories like mystery thriller, speculative fiction are much smaller high percentages. The only one that I was surprised to see so small was science fiction. We only have 2 books on here. If you don't know, Afrofuturism is a genre. It is a very prevalent genre of study. African American people are some of the people that have really changed and grown the genre, so to see them not represented or on this list at all is kind of wow. Like, it was definitely a missed opportunity here. I just would have liked to see more representation for the SFF category here. For my TBR, I had only read one of these books, which was Chain Gang All-Stars, so I really had a wide field of books to read here. And because these books are new, there weren't a lot that I previously had on my TBR. Only about 7 books on my TBR. In that way, yes, this list is effective for me as a Goodreads person, for I would assume the majority of Goodreads users, because it is introducing us to books that were not previously on our radars. That's not necessarily a good thing because it definitely shows some of our blind spots, some of my blind spots. Nonetheless, I'm happy because I'm always looking for new books, and this is showing me some of the new picks. But let's get into our main stats. Obviously, these are all created by Black authors, but like I said, they're not all from America. About 80% are American, but there are a lot from across the diaspora. We have a French American, we have someone from Trinidad, someone from Sudan, someone from Gambia, a Haitian author, a British author, Ghananese American. I specified where it was Ghananese versus Ghananese American or Ghananese British, just because I know that those diaspora experiences are different, and being like a first generation American is very different than obviously being from a family that is a generational American, because most likely if you are an American that his family has been here for a while, it's because your ancestors were enslaved and taken here, so it is a very different experience growing up here. We have Nigerian British, 1 author from Cameroon, 1 author from Botswana, 2 Canadian, another Senegalese, Jamaican, Ghananese American, Nigerian American, Ethiopian, Afro-Mexican, and Nigerian. So there are a lot of countries that we haven't seen yet being represented here, and just a lot of the diaspora covered. Not all of it, but more. I'm surprised there weren't more Caribbean, but it wasn't not present at all. And as for queerness, there were only 21 books, or 11% were queer. Again, it is there, even though it's not represented as much as I personally am looking for. It is not bad by any means. So I think this list, for the majority of our white Goodreads counterparts, they're gonna get something out of this list if they take the time to discover some new pit. And I think this is one of the better lists because it was curated by a person rather than a rating system. But if you've looked at any of the New York Times lists, any of those lists that are created by people and teams of people, they're never good either. Let's be honest. People have found so many qualms with them. So I don't think it's a really win-lose situation. The algorithm-based Goodreads research that these articles are going off of. They're doing a specific thing. They're doing what they want to. I think what comes into play for me personally when looking at these lists is that they're not just created to have a blog on Goodreads. They're created with a purpose. They're a call to action for readers to read off of. And so that's where it becomes something to investigate. But again, they made the right choice by having a person make this list versus just doing it on whim like they have been for the rest of these lists. Hello and welcome to the writing room, or at least that's what it feels like. I'm sitting down today at my makeshift desk instead of doing a standing video, using my old mic as well, so sorry about quality changes there, but I have things to discuss and I'm ready to discuss them, so I'm not going to worry about a mic malfunction right now. We have 2 books to talk about. So for the Essential Reader Challenge, I decided to pick Brandon Taylor's book, The Late American, not The Last American as I keep liking to call it, but I picked this for a lot of reasons. This is Brandon Taylor's 3rd novel. I had heard great things about his 1st novel, Real Life. I wanted to read it. It has been on my reading list for a while, so he was a part of my original TBR that I was picking from. I was also just in the mood for something queer. I was in the mood for literary fiction, so this ended up being a great pick. This a 3.75, not quite a 4-star, but still very enjoyable, especially for someone that has not read a literary fiction book in a while. This just really was a breath of fresh air in terms of like style, prose, what it was trying to accomplish. This is a collection of short stories or vignettes of these characters that are college students or graduate students at a prestigious literary arts college. There are also some characters that are just living around this college, but for the most part, it's a lot of Black and queer people at this college pursuing degrees in a creative field. The stories, a lot of them follow a very similar pattern. The characters struggling with something, struggling with at-home life, struggling with art, reflecting on past traumas, dealing with new traumas, and a lot of times ending in sexual exploits or just kind of a sexual encounter gone wrong, or using it as an escape and it actually ending up being more harmful than good. And there's normally a similar kind of realization, but the characters aren't really changing or moving forward. It's very literary in that way. I can say while the stories, there were similarities between them, it was greater for the sum of its parts. I didn't feel like I was reading the same story over and over again. I didn't feel like, oh, this story was better. I didn't need all the rest of them. It just worked really well having these similar stories from different characters with different experiences, with similar themes, but not always the same. But, you know, as someone that went to grad school for a creative degree, always relatable. It's always touches something within me. I wouldn't say that Brandon Taylor's writing was jaw-droppingly amazing, but there were just so many great little moments where I was like, the way he put this, the way he imagined this moment or used a metaphor, or the way he visualized it for the characters was just so specific and so well done. And there are a couple characters that are in the poetry track, and I can see the poetry coming through. Like, again, it wasn't purple, it wasn't like jaw-droppingly amazing craft or anything, but it was both nuanced and just, I'm looking, what's the word for it, but it was like the writing felt like it was under the radar in a way that I knew it was really hard to achieve this beautifully simplistic writing. Like, it's very hard to achieve that kind of elegance without seeming to be like a lot of work. I enjoyed these stories. I think it was a little bit of not having read literary fiction for a while. Also, they were just good. So there's that. I think it was a good pick for this challenge. Like we've discussed, there wasn't a ton of genre fiction on here. It really was a focus on literary, historical, and memoir personal experiences. There has been a big talk in the literary publishing community about not just having Black voices, but having Black joy, not just having these stories of suffering. And it's hard because like this kind of does fall into that. Is it only these stories of struggle that they're picking? Is it only being curated for literary promising? I mean, at least they had some romance, they had some genre on here. Maybe it needed a little bit more, just another curator on this that could like think about those things. What's interesting is that the comments are completely shut off on this page. I don't know if things got out of hand or if they were just anticipating things getting out of hand, but there's no way to really gauge, unfortunately, how people felt about this challenge unless somebody else talks about it on the interweb and I can find it. From my limited perspective, we've already discussed having a person curating this makes this list very different from the Goodreads curation that we've seen up to this point. We know so far that Goodreads is a very white American space. In a lot of ways, this list is probably good for those readers. For me, who else is this list serving? Is it serving a greater community of people? That is something to hold into question. So without further ado, we can finally get into the list that started it all. And that is going to be the romance list. This is the thing that drove me crazy. The list that had me talking my mom's ear off. That was like, this is something to discuss. This is something to make a video about. And that is the romance list. This is the list that frustrated me. But before we get into that frustration, let's look at the list. The Spicy Sweet achievement. Collect this achievement when you read one of these spicy or sweet romances. And this is created by our friend Sharon. Love stories never get out of style. If several centuries of fiction publishing have told us anything, it's this. Perhaps we're all romantics at heart. At any rate, we've collected below the 100 most popular romance novels on Goodreads published in the past 3 years. That's 2022 through 2025 for those eagle-eyed. These are the books that show up most often on Goodreads members' collective shelves, and we further filtered the list to include books with a 4-star rating or higher. As you know, these books are both well-read and well-loved. These books are sequenced in order of overall popularity among Goodreads regulars. As you will quickly see, the romantasy subgenre has taken flight in recent years, thanks to no small part due to a little dragon book you may have heard of. We can see that the recent influence of book talk on the rise of the mega author writers whose entire bodies of work have gone supernova thanks to the sheer velocity of the peer-to-peer recommendation in the digital age. It is also interesting to note that many of the authors on this list started as self-published writers before striking deals with traditional publishers. In addition to contemporary romance and romantasy, you'll find many subgenres, variations often in combination, dark romance, sports romance, rom-coms, paranormal romance, westerns, and so forth. Click on the book's cover image for more information for each title, and add any good leads to your want-to-read shelf. Oh god, I'm sorry, this article is so cutesy, which having to read it after the essential readers one is just so jarring. I think in general, that's the thing that gets me, is that these are, I assume, we're supposed to be wanting to get all these achievements. It's supposed to be completed by one person, so to have these different tones across the articles is just so weird. Obviously, I get why we're being playful here with romance, but it just feels off when you're thinking of these lists as like a thing that exists collected together. But I do appreciate Sharon for sticking with the 3 years, for sticking with the 100 books. This is the template in a lot of ways because it has the rules that I want in place for all these lists. 100 books. It's in order from favorite to least favorite. It has 4-star rating or higher. Oh god, is this list so bad because it doesn't have any curation or the curation that we've seen on past lists. That being, there is no curation to limit to only one book per series, and there's no curation on these authors. If an author is so popular, her whole backlist is popular, all her books are going to be on here. Before I get on my soapbox, let's look at the stats. The authors, it's so bad. So obviously Elsie Silver is the worst offender on this list. All 7 of her books, she might have more backlist, I don't know, but 7 of her books made it on this list. One, to have written 7 books in a year is kind of crazy, assuming maybe her backlist have been republished, but that's still crazy. But as for authors that have 3 repeats, we have Rebecca Yarros on here, Lucy Score, Larissa Broadbent, Abby Jimenez, 4 for Lauren Asher, 4 for Liz Tomford, Jennifer L. Armentrout, and Sarah Kate. And then we have so many more authors that were on here at least twice. Emily Henry, Sarah J. Maas, Allie Hazelwood, Rachel Gillig, H.D. Carlton, Kristen Lauren, Annabelle Monaghan, Elle Kennedy, Chantel Teaser, Raven Kennedy, Chloe Walsh, Megan Quinn, Becca Mack, Rena Kent, and Carrie Lake. The majority of authors on this list are repeated. And if we go to series, because I tracked how many books were in a series, it gets even crazier. 51 books were a part of a series, 32 books were the first book in a series, which means only 17 books were standalones. That is insane to me. And it just shows how repeated the authors on this list are. Going to genres, I only counted each book for one genre here, unlike fantasy, so that we could see the real split here. 30 books are fantasy, 38 are contemporary, 13 are dark romance, 4 are paranormal, and 15 are sports. So we can see that those subcategories come in a lot stronger than they do for our other lists so far. And as for my TBR, I had read one of these books, which was Delilah Green Doesn't Care, the queer book, and I only had 3 on my list. And that would be The Spell Shop and the other witchy book book on here? Let me see. I wanted to read A Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches and The Spell Shop, and then The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy, which are all fantastical leanings, so not surprised to see them here. But let's get into the ethnicity. Oh gosh, 93% white, 3 Chinese American, that's Anna Huang, 1 Indian, 1 is unknown, I could not figure it out and I wasn't gonna speculate, and 2 African American. That's bad. That's very, very bad. For nationality, it is 77% American, 2 Australian, 11 Canadian, 6 British, 2 New Zealander, and 2 Irish. There are non-Western voices in here. Everybody is from an English-speaking country. And as for queerness, I was trying to help it out by pinning down that a couple of these books have queer side characters, but there's only 1 queer book on here, 1 queer romance, and that would be Delilah Green. I'm excited to see it sapphic. Surprised, but excited. Yeah, it's not great. It's not great. So I've already gotten on my soapbox why I think reading diversely is so important, but the romance category really frustrated me is that romance is the most popular genre right now, or at least to an outside perspective. If you're looking at Book Talk, romance seems to be the most popular genre right now. Romance is the biggest genre for non-book influencers. It's probably the biggest genre for book influencers, and it's the biggest genre for people that are new to reading, getting back into reading. It's just the hit most popular thing right now. Some of the ways that people are getting started doing this reading is digitally and through Kindle. You can really see where Amazon has gotten their claws in the reading scene here because Kindle Unlimited and the romance Kindle subscription is so popular. If you look at the books that Kindle is recommending, I just feel sad for you guys because it really is an echo chamber. You're not getting anything new or interesting here. You're getting the same authors, you're getting just the same things, the same kind of stories over and over again. We've seen so far that every list has the same problem with diversity, but it just comes to a head in this particular achievement. It just shows how pronounced this problem is, and it's so frustrating because I know that this is the most popular genre right now. It's just really highlighting the issues that we have on Goodreads through the reader influencer space. Editing Courtney here. So I just wanted to point out how significant the difference between the romance popularity and the regular genre fiction popularity is, because this amazed me. I've been saying it that romance is such a big genre right now and that it just has so many more readers, but let's put the proof in the pudding with an example. The biggest fiction read of last year, the book that we could not keep on the shelf. This book was selling so well in hardcover that publishers didn't even bring it into paperback until just recently. The book that has its own TV adaptation, Lessons in Chemistry, ridiculously popular. It just has a little bit over 1.5 million ratings on Goodreads, but if you look at the most popular romance pick that we've seen on multiple of these lists, the thing that really overtook last year, Fourth Wing, it has almost 3 million. It has almost double Lessons in Chemistry. There's no movie for this. There's nothing besides the book itself and the campaign and the way that it's swept through social media propping up this book. That just shows you how much more popular romance picks are from general fiction readers. We get away from Fourth Wing, even just other romance books, they're just so much more popular than their fiction counterparts, even when they have wide readership and wide acclaim. It is crazy. If we were only seeing one book from every series, if we were only seeing one book from every author, I don't think these lists would get that much better. Maybe a little bit, but not that much. We're coming to an end to this, so let me go back and finish rereading Delilah Green so we can discuss it, and we can discuss what were the most popular books on all the lists combined, what authors we saw the most from all of these lists, and just kind of some overall thoughts and opinions. Finally gotten through rereading Delilah Green Doesn't Care, so let me grab it. This was a great reread. I ended up getting the audiobook for this. I was so surprised how quickly I flew through this. I really did remember a lot of the story beats once we got into everything, and I was kind of surprised because I don't remember it being such a quick turnaround romance. There is an element of belief that you kind of have to put aside for romances, especially like romances that happen in a 2-week or 2-day time span. And so like I could see why this wouldn't work for people, but for me, these two characters had a history. Even taking out that believability out of account, it just really worked. It didn't just feel like chemistry between these characters. It didn't just feel like sexual tension. It felt like they had a connection and they had reasons to connect with each other, and just like the history that they were dealing with, their personal histories as well as where their personal histories connect. Everything was just so fun to read. There are those kind of silly, cheesy rom-com elements. They're played for laughs enough without getting too corny or too into the tropes. This was just such a fantastic reread. I just really enjoyed it and I read it so quickly. I love this world that was created. I love these characters. It's so fun. Romances don't particularly age super well, especially when there's kind of that humor coming through, but for the most part, I think this really stood up and I still really enjoy it. I gave it like that full 4.5 stars again. And I'm glad I returned to this instead of reading something that I wasn't particularly interested in. So like, is this a representation of the list? No, we know that this is not a good representation of the list. It's the only one of its kind. It was popular, it did get acclaim, but this is an outlier for this challenge. And so for a typical Goodreads person that isn't super competitive, they're not going to be completing the challenges that don't interest them. Goodreads challenges are probably best for people that are interested in a lot of different genres, that are interested in reading across spheres, and have not read a lot, just for the sake of they have more options available to them. For this challenge, I had every option available to me, but unfortunately, it didn't appeal to me because I am not that wide consumer reader. I'm more a niche, very specialized reader now. Is the difference between a niche reader and a commercial reader just the amount of books you read? It seems to be the case. I can just see my own journey as well as other people's from where they started as a book content creator, from where they ended up later in life, how their reading tastes have changed, how they developed, how they've become a lot more picky. I feel like as you become more picky, the Goodreads challenge, it has to be somebody that reads a lot of books because you have to read 6 books in a 4-month time period. But on the same hand, it has to be completed by somebody that, one, hasn't read everything on the list, and two, can find something that they're interested in on every list. It's not really for a commercial reader, and it's not really for somebody that reads a lot. It's a very weird thing to think about. I guess the reading challenges are really just for me. It's for the Kindle readers, let's be real. So we are back to wrap up my final thoughts on this challenge on Goodreads. I started filming this video before the 6th challenge was announced, and it ended up being, like I thought, something for Women's History Month, and I was really pleasantly surprised because it's another curated list like our Black Essential Reader Challenge, and they decided to go with a curated list by a person, not by Goodreads, and it is all nonfiction, which I thought was a very interesting choice. I already completed the challenge by reading In the Dream House, which is something that I've wanted to read for a very long time, but those statistics are not included in this video, but I don't think they would really change much. So basically what I did was I compiled all of our lists to kind of see what books were recommended the most and what authors we were seeing the most. So what I've done for the end of this video is compiled a spreadsheet of all the authors to make a graph, and then compiled all the books to make a graph. Google could not handle this graph. It could handle the author one, but it could not handle the books, so I had to figure out a different way to do this. I just made a Excel spreadsheet and learned how to find duplicates. So let's go over what authors appeared the most through all of these lists, and then we can go over what books appeared most often. So the author is a little predictable because it's all the lists we've already discussed combined. So romance really takes the cake here because that romance list had so many repeat authors, and then again we saw a lot of these authors appearing in Buzzy if they were 2024 popular releases. When we're looking at the author count, you're really seeing the problem that we've had compounded because our most seen author is Elsie Silver, followed with Sarah J. Maas. Both of them have 7 books that appear across both lists. And then for 5, we have Lucy Score listed 5 times. Ali Hazelwood listed 4 times. Anna Huang listed 5 times. Emily Henry listed 4 times. Rebecca Yarros listed 5 times. Clarissa Broadbent listed 4 times. Taylor Jenkins Reid listed 5 times. Only other outlier in this is going to be James McBride, and then R.F. Kuang listed 4 times respectively. This is a really hard thing to look at, so I'm really digging through trying to find these authors that were listed more than 3 times here. Brandon Sanderson another 4 times, Liza Tomford another 4 times, but I think you get the gist. We have one commercial author that's very popular, Taylor Jenkins Reid. We have 2 literary fiction authors that are really popular. We have one fantasy author that appeals to fantasy fans that have read a lot of fantasy and a little bit of fantasy. And then we have the romance. The romance list is really swaying the data here, but I think that just shows how nonsensical that list is when compared to the rest of the list, because it's really swaying things. James McBride, to me, makes sense to be here on this list 4 times because he is one of the standout authors of the last couple years, and Heaven and Earth's Grocery Store appeared on the multiple lists, as well as being just a popular Goodreads title. It was Barnes & Noble yearly pick. No, the year before. James was this year. That was the year before. So it's like the heavy hitter in the literary world, being recommended to basically everybody as exceptional, and his backlist is getting boosted along with that. Brandon Sanderson makes sense. We know how much of a heavy hitter he is with the fantasy community at large and with general fantasy readers that are maybe not as niche. And then the rest of these, Emily Henry, Ali Hazelwood, Rebecca Yarros, Sarah J. Maas, they are the heavy hitters in the digital age, in the romance community. That's who we see. I think R.F. Kuang is the only notable exception here because she is an author that has written across genres, so she has multiple areas where she can come up. She can come up on Buzzy, she can come up on the fantasy list, and with Babel, to me, is historical fiction, but it wasn't on that list. But she is like the most diverse author in terms of genre and scope and popularity, because both Yellowface was extremely popular, as well as Babel and the Poppy War. And those titles are so different in who their readership could potentially be, whereas some of these other popular books are going to be popular with the same kinds of people. But let's head on over to books and see what books were seen the most. We have The House of Eve. We have Did You Hear About Kitty Carr? We have Wayward. We have A Covenant of Water. We have Starling House, Legends and Lattes, Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, House of Flame and Shadow, The Serpent and the Wings of Night, Gold, Love Theoretically, Things We Never Got Over, Things We Left Behind, and then Chain Gang All-Stars. But what's interesting about them, because of the way the lists are set up, you have Buzzy coming in with the best or most read of 2024. That's where we're seeing all of these books for the first time. And then when we get into those genre categories, that's where we're seeing the books for the second time. So to be a top contender for the most popular book on Goodreads, or like the most talked about book on Goodreads, I guess, as far as this challenge goes, you have to be a 2024 release. I mean, if you're popular enough to be on Buzzy, you're gonna end up somewhere on your respective genre list. There's no books that are here more than 2 times. All of these are on Buzzy, and then they're on Essential Reader, or the historical, or the fantasy, or most likely the romance. That's where we're seeing a lot of the repeats again. There is only one book, as far as I can tell, that has been on multiple lists. So this is the top book, the most commercial book, I guess, in terms of readership for Goodreads right now, and that is going to be Heaven and Earth's Grocery Store. We see it on Buzzy, we see it on the historical eras, and we see it on the essential readers. And like I discussed, this was a big hit, so it's not a surprise to see it here. My camera died, but we're not letting that stop us today. We're going to finish this out. So like I said, Heaven and Earth's Grocery Store, this is the most marketable book in terms of Goodread readership. I think this makes a ton of sense for its popularity, for who was pushing this book. Is a backlist, the marketing campaign, the critical acclaim. They were getting marketed for a commercial audience as well as for a literary audience. So they were able to be on multiple lists because of what the book was, but it was also able to be just that popular. But let's take a look at it as far as Goodreads says. So its success on Goodreads, it's at a 3.94, which for Goodreads is kind of low. You kind of expect it to be at a 4-star. It was a Goodreads Choice Award in 2023, but if you look at its ratings, it has so much less than the other books we were talking about earlier. It doesn't even hit 1 million. It doesn't even hit 500,000. It's at, oh, I'm so bad at saying numbers, 278,012 ratings. That is significantly different. It's the most commercial, it's the most marketed. That is nothing to scoff at for readers. I'm just saying, when you look at Fourth Wing, it's just so like, oh my god, it's so different. Not in a bad way, just in a like, oh my god, romance has so much influence, which is what we've been discussing. If I was going to continue on with this video, this would be the next book I'm reading for obvious reasons. But we've gone on for a very long time. We've gotten on my soapbox. We've discussed data. I don't think either one of us needs this video to go on any longer. But hey, thank you so much for being along for this ride. It was incredibly fascinating for me, so I hope it was just as fascinating for you. Thank you for sticking with it. As far as final thoughts, like I've said, I'm just trying to figure out who this is really for, who's really really gonna go out and accomplish this? Who's reading through these? I think I'm the only crazy person that is like looking through these articles with any kind of I don't want to say criticism, because I hope I'm not criticizing these people. They're doing their job and doing it to the best of their abilities as far as the resources that Goodreads is probably giving them. But I'm the only person that I know of that's scrutinizing this and really trying to figure this out. I think I've come to the conclusion that romance has an even wider scope than I initially thought of, which scares me a little bit as a non-typical romance reader, in that I only read queer romances. I don't know. What are my final thoughts? There's so much that I don't know about the publishing side, about the marketing side, that probably would answer so many questions. Obviously, I'm not an employee for Goodreads, so I don't know how things are working there. I mean, I've gone back and I've looked, and these are not freelance people. These are people that work for Goodreads. These are their two blogists. I don't recommend stalking these people, but they are Goodreads employees. They're working at the company. They're real people. But it's like, what is Goodreads' objective for these? Why are they putting them out? Why do they want us to read them? Who are they expecting to complete them? And who really is going out there and doing it? I don't know how popular these challenges are because nobody's really talking about them. And if you go to the comments sections where the comments are allowed, there's not a ton of comments. I don't know if the casual Goodreads user is, reading these articles or even thinking about them this way. So I'm left with a lot of questions, but the data that I have compiled is interesting, to say the least. It is very intriguing. I don't know, maybe I'm going to become the Goodreads specialist. I'm going to be reading all of their articles from now on and just really thinking about what they're doing as a company, waiting for them to start implementing AI in a more direct approach to how they run things. I'm curious for that. So stay tuned. I'm sure that at the end of this month, when May begins, that the new challenges will be announced, or at least the first one. It seems like it's going to be a quarterly thing where they're going to be announcing things. I already have a couple ideas of what articles are going to be changed into their next lists, and I can say there's some exciting things coming. So let me know if you've participated in the Goodreads challenges. Congrats, we did it. Yay us. I'm such a completionist, so it always feels good when I get a challenge done, but at the same time, I'm like, what does that say about me supporting Goodreads in a way? But I don't know. We did it for the sake of science, for the sake of reading, and that's all that matters. Again, thank you so much for sticking with this long form content. It has been something that I've been working on for so long and enjoying for so long. It has been so enjoyable, but it is something that I took a lot of effort to do, so thank you so much. But as I end every video, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later, and happy reading.